We really want to just thank the TSDCA for allowing us to teach these series of roundtables and webinars. With me today, I have Mr. Merlin Van Veen. Merlin will be handling your questions and prompting me and interrupting me whenever questions are appropriate. And we also have John Manito. John Manito is the sales manager for the Northeast region. He's also in business development for Meyer Sound. And John is, if you're in New York, John is your sales manager. So please feel free to get to know John. And then we also, for a short time, have Bob Mccarthy. Bob is director of system optimization for Meyer Sound. You probably know who Bob is. And Bob is going to be joining us for a few minutes now. And then next week, at our fourth session, Bob will be teaching how to design immersive sound systems, particularly for Spacemap Go. Just some things and considerations that we all need. So this is a fun series. We're really excited about it. This is me. My wife had to take this headshot during the pandemic because marketing was like, we need a headshot. We have a ton of other resources available. The first thing that we want to talk about is the Thinking Sound YouTube page. This is our Meyer Sound YouTube page. There's a lot of existing Spacemap Go training, more of an application overview and things like that. And then we also have a system design that goes into really deep detail of designing sound systems. And there's tons of other videos. Of course, during the pandemic, like everyone else, we participated in webinar wars amongst the industry. And there's a lot of really good content there for you to check out. And your go-to source of information for all things Spacemap Go is the Spacemap Go help website. This is essentially the operating instructions for Spacemap Go. We're constantly updating it, adding new things. For example, you'll find the OSC library, as well as the QLab template project file for Figure 53's QLab to recall commands within Spacemap Go. And then Spacemap Go is a new product. We released it in October of 2020 during a pandemic. And so we want to hear feedback from you. So if you have a feature request or a bug report about Spacemap Go, our product managers are listening and they want to hear from you. This will help us develop add even more features. So let's start from the beginning. With Spacemap, it's been around for a very, very long time, about 25 years. And chances are, if you've ever seen a show on Broadway, or a regional theater, or a big spectacle show in Las Vegas, you've experienced Spacemap before. Shows like the Beatles' Love in Las Vegas, or Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet have all used this technology to move sound around and create immersive environments. And in particular, with theatrical sound designers, the reason Spacemap has been used is because it allows you to overcome the challenges that we deal with as theater sound practitioners on a day-to-day basis. So Spacemap is a robust technology that's been around, and these shows have been running for numbers of years consistently. And it allows you as the sound designer or the composer or the musician the ability to really overcome some of these challenges that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, things like budget, the lighting designer, architecture, the video designer, the director, all of these things that are sometimes challenges for us as sound designers. And so Spacemap really began in 1986 in Australia as an experiment from Steve Ellison. And Steve was working in a geodesic dome in Australia, and there were speakers all throughout this geodesic dome. And he needed to figure out a simple but robust mathematical way to move sound around this dome. And so he came up with this algorithm, and he realized he had something. So in 1993, him and Jonathan Deans started a company called Level Control Systems, or LCS. Chances are you might have seen some old LCS gear running around a rental house. What's really interesting about this is the first show that this Spacemap technology got put on was in 1993. And the first show that it was on was for the George Lucas Star Wars Spectacular in Japan. And this was a Feld Entertainment tour around Japan. And so the first time this technology got put into a show, it was for an audience of 18,000 people in an arena. And since that 1993 date, all the way up to the present, Spacemap has grown and evolved holistically throughout live entertainment. So it's not been developed in a lab. It's actually been developed with collaboration between sound designers like yourselves and composers and musicians to build upon that existing technology. And so around 2004, 2005, Meyer Sound acquired Level Control Systems. And we've been working together for years before that. Basically, the way it was working was they were doing the processing for the Cirque du Soleil shows, and we were making the loudspeakers. And so it was sort of a match made in heaven. And we've had Spacemap technology implemented in every iteration of digital processor that we've made up until the Galaxy. So Dimitri was the latest generation of processor. We still use Dimitri today for Constellation sound systems. And chances are on Broadway, you've seen a Dimitri system running around. Right around 2018, what was interesting was this word immersive audio became an industry buzzword. And we got to looking at why this was a buzzword. And it turned out that our competitors had caught up, and they did a couple things that were a little bit like better than us, which was they made the system really easy to program, and they also made it cheaper, so a little more accessible. So we got to thinking, and we said, well, why don't we improve upon this and put Spacemap on a Galaxy? And so that's what we did. And we spent a lot of time researching what the competitors were doing, researching what we've done in the past and what all of our sound designer colleagues have asked us for. And so we added more features, and we implemented Spacemap Go or Spacemap into the Galaxy, and we call it Spacemap Go. So what is Spacemap Go? It's an iPad-based immersive mixing tool. So it's a free iPad app, and it runs on the Galaxy platform. So the Galaxy is actually handling all the movement and processing and everything. And the iPad is just the controller. That's it. It's just a controller. And we'll talk about that in a second. But all of the movement and spatialization happen in the Galaxy. To use Spacemap Go, basically you need a Galaxy, an iPad, and that's it. You can have an immersive processor, and the Galaxy can still tune your PA. If you have more than one Galaxy, you need an Avenue certified switch, or one or two, depending on if you want redundancy or not. And of course, if you still want to tune your PA, you can use Compass Go on the iPad, or you can use Compass running on Mac or PC. The Galaxy is the server. It's what we call a client-server relationship, just like Dimitri. So the Galaxy is running everything, and the iPads are just the clients. And so you can have any number of iPads, whether they're connected via hardline or wireless, and you can mix and match. It works on any flavor of iPad that can run iOS 14 or above. So you can actually use the iPad mini or the iPad Pro, and you can create this sort of immersive, tablet space for you to touch and program your show and mix around. So let's talk about I/O. Each Spacemap Go system can have a total of 32 channels or inputs. And what's interesting is those inputs can be mixed. So you can have an AES input, an analog input, or you can also use Milan AVB. So for example, one thing that's not really known is that the Galaxy 408 is a 4 analog in and 8 analog output device. But in Milan AVB world, the Galaxy 408 is actually a 32 input by 16 output device on Milan AVB. So if you're running in a theater or you're on tour, you could use this single rack device to not only tune your PA, but you could put it in line sort of as an effects rack and use it as an immersive processor as well. If your console speaks Milan, it could give you a 16 output immersive mixer. So a single rack unit immersive processor. And of course, the Galaxy 816 can accept 32 inputs via AVB. It can also accept 8 inputs, AES or analog, and it has 16 analog outputs. And if you need more outputs, we don't really have a limit on how many outputs you can use. You just add more Galaxies. So you have 32 pathways into the system, and you have any number of outputs. And we've actually tested up to 256 outputs. So that's 16 Galaxies using Milan certified switch. And we've tested more, but for right now, we're saying 256 outputs is what we can do. If you're from Dimitri world, that's the equivalent of a DCM4 Dimitri system worth of outputs. So one of the things that we really focused on with Spacemap Go was to make it as flexible, fast, and easy to program as possible. I've programmed some shows on QStation. It's fun, it's great, you can do anything with it, but sometimes when you're in a theatrical environment where you're holding for lights and waiting on sound, you need to be able to program fast. And so we revamped the OSC library for Spacemap Go to make it as human readable and as fast as possible to program. In addition, we work with real-time tracking protocols, things like black tracks. And of course, any DAW that you have can speak OSC, but we'll talk about some more interesting stuff with the DAW coming up. And the best part is, if your theater has a Galaxy already, it's a free update. Also, if you are renting a Galaxy for your PA processing on your show, you can still use Spacemap Go and use it as an immersive processor. So it's actually one of the most affordable immersive processors out there, and it can still tune your PA. So let's go into it real quick and talk about getting connected and go into Compass. So right here, I've got a couple of Galaxies already running, but I wanted to show you just how simple it is to get connected. I'm here in Cedar City, Utah. My wife is doing a show, and so I am working remotely. I don't have Galaxies with me, but you can program Spacemap Go completely offline without the hardware. So we'll show that. So what you'll do is you'll add open up Compass, and you'll add a processor. And here's our processor. I've got a couple connected already, but you'll basically just add processor, and you click Use Virtual. And then we'll notice that this processor is blue and behaves like every normal Galaxy processor. Then you go to Settings and reboot your Galaxy into Spacemap mode. So Settings, Network, reboot into Spacemap mode. And from there, you switch over to your iPad. And in this case, I'm going to go to the network view here. And once that Galaxy reboots, we can see that it appears as a device in our Spacemap Go iPad inventory. I'm using a third-party software to broadcast my iPad onto my Mac. It's called Reflector, and I have a mouse via Bluetooth connected to my iPad. So here we go. There's that Galaxy appeared. I can click it, and this is the setup wizard. It asks you how many inputs you want to use, whether you're using analog or AES or Milan. In this case, we'll say we'll just use Milan AVB. I click proceed. It says, how many AVB channels do you want to use? I say 32, because that's the maximum. And then it's going to say what device you want to connect to. And you click that, you click save to system, and it auto configures the Galaxy for you, gets everything up and running. And while that's loading, we'll go back to Compass, and we can see now that the Galaxy is orange. We can see that our inputs have been labeled and our outputs have been labeled in order. And now what we can do within Spacemap Go is connect our AVB if we were actually connected to hardware, but we're not. So what I can do is go down to my mix view, select a channel. For example, let's say I had channel, only stereo outputs from my console into my Galaxy. I could then load one of our pre-existing space maps. For example, let's see if I sort by ID, we have a pre-existing template of sort of surround libraries of space maps that you can use. A very simple one would be a 5.1. We know what that is. So I click that, I load a 5.1 space map. And if I had my outputs from my Galaxy plugged into my system, we can notice that the matrix level is changing as we pan things around. And if we go back into Compass, we can see that the matrix level of input 1 corresponds to the matrix level that we see within Spacemap Go. And so Spacemap Go is controlling the matrix level of the Galaxy. There's a couple other fun things that are really awesome. And the reason it's on an iPad, you get some really cool features. First, you notice that there's a white sort of halo that surrounds each one of these, what are called nodes. And we notice that as I move my object or panner towards one of these nodes, we can see that it expands, representing the level of the sound that's coming out. So this is a visual way for me as a sound designer to see what speakers my sound is coming out of. And we can also see the matrix level being manipulated up top. And of course, if you're familiar with Spacemap, we've got some other awesome features. And I'm going to switch over to my, my existing demo system that I have loaded up. So let's say, for example, you had a helicopter and you wanted that helicopter to move around. Well, I could use the iPad and manually, I'm going to use my finger now, touch it with my finger and move the sound around. And we could see that the sound is being manipulated through multiple loudspeakers. But I could also use what are called trajectories to move a sound around automatically. And trajectories are pathways that you can draw. For example, you can have a very simple trajectory like this square here. And now if I press play, we can see that the audio or the sound is moving around the loudspeaker space or the space map. And since it's on an iPad, what we can do is use our fingers and use some of the multi-touch of the iPad. And in real time, as the sound is manipulating, is moving on the trajectory, we can manipulate how it works. One other new feature that just came out a couple weeks ago is the addition of tap tempo. So now, let's say I have a piece of music that needs to move around at a certain BPM. Well, I can type in that BPM and we can have it move around, or I can tap it in simply by just tapping the iPad around. And so trajectories are pretty fun. You can add a whole bunch of new features. You can draw your own trajectories. For example, let's do the helicopter first. If I want the helicopter to actually be a helicopter and move around the pathway of a helicopter, there we go. And in real time, I could just, while that's playing, I can move down and put on Soundosaurus Rex. Soundosaurus Rex is a dinosaur that my wife drew on Spacemap Go, and we can make Soundosaurus Rex big, we can spin Soundosaurus Rex around, or we could just make Soundosaurus Rex walk across the loudspeaker system in the room. You're probably saying, oh my gosh, that looks really complicated. How do you draw that? Well, you go down to the create window here. Now, if you click create a trajectory via the create window, you can actually record a trajectory by either tapping and where you want a sound to go, and then you click finish recording. And now the trajectory will move around where you recorded it and be saved to your library. Or let me turn snapping off. You can actually draw some complex shapes. So for example, if I wanted to make a sound, there you go. There's Josh. I sucked at cursive as a kid, but there we go. And now I can move Josh into my library, and that same track that had Soundosaurus Rex on it, we can add the Josh trajectory to it and make it bigger. And if we need to rotate it or turn the sound around, there we go. So all of this can be programmed offline, and you can do a whole bunch of different things. We'll talk about how to program in snapshots on the session number 3. But this is just a quick little example to show you the power of Spacemap Go and how fast it is to get up and running. So here are the steps for connection. Open up Compass, name your galaxy. And then if you have more than one galaxy, set a group name for those galaxies. Then reboot each galaxy into Spacemap mode. And then in Spacemap Go, move to the iPad and configure the input setup. So if you have 2 galaxies and you want to use just analog inputs, configure it that way. And then save it to the system, and you can get off and running very quickly. So the next question is what the heck is a space map? And so a space map is a visual representation of galaxy outputs. It just represents outputs on a galaxy. It's nothing fancy. And space maps, the way I like to think of it is space maps are custom panners that you, as the sound designer, create. So if you have a sound that needs to go to every other loudspeaker, you can draw or build a space map that does that. Or if you have a space map that needs to be a 5.1 sound system, like here on the right, we're pretty much familiar with what 5.1 is. there you go, a simple 5.1 space map on the right. They're just custom panners that you create. And so what's cool about this is since you're drawing the panner doesn't have to look like the room you're in. And we'll talk about some ways to do this, but Spacemap, we like to say, is an abstraction of a loudspeaker layout. The panner does not have to look like the room that you're in, and you can do some really incredible things with it. And so we'll talk about making space maps real quick and get into it. So space maps are composed of what are called nodes and trisets. And so you'll see these different shapes: square, circle, triangles. And so we'll just review them real quick, and then we'll build the space map together. The first type of node is what's called a speaker node, and that represents the galaxy output. It's very simple. Here would be a space map with 4 speakers in it. So here's a quad space map, for example. And then the next type of node is called a virtual node. We notice that we have a virtual node here in the center of this space map. And the virtual node is sort of like a multi-tool node. It can do multiple things. The first thing that a virtual node can do is it can send signal to multiple loudspeakers. So if I have an object and I move my object towards the center of this virtual node, and this virtual node was linked to these 4 speakers, it would send sound evenly to those 4 speakers. But in this case, I'm not linked. And what I'm using this virtual node for is just to connect trisets. We'll talk about what that is in a second. And then another type of node is called a silent node. And silent nodes, if you use your context clues, are pretty straightforward. If I move my object towards a silent node, the sound gets quieter. So this is a way for me to build a panner that fades in and out a sound for you, so that you don't have to be dealing with a level on a fader. You can actually just fade in and out a sound very quickly. So if I have a sound that needs to move in and then go to this loudspeaker, it could start out quiet and then get louder and then be really loud at the loudspeaker. And of course, we work in live sound, and we have to deal with subsystems, all sorts of fills, everything from front fills, side fills, up fills, down fills, and subwoofers. And so we have a tool for that called what's called a derive node. And what it is it derives its audio level from the outputs or the speaker nodes it's connected to. So if I have 4 speakers, like I have here, and 1 subwoofer, I want to link my derive node to all 4 speakers. And now, anytime sound comes out of this loudspeaker, it comes also out of this output, which would be connected to my subwoofer. So this is an easy way to base manage your sound system. And we'll show some examples of how you can use this tool. And the magic of Spacemap happens within the triset. So what is a triset? It's a triangle. It's a fancy word for a triangle, and it's a triangular panning surface. What does that mean? Well, if you have a pan pod on your mix console, imagine that. You move left 100%, then you move center, that's a 50-50%, and then you move right, that would be 3 points. There's 3 points in a triangle. That is a panning surface. So this is where the Spacemap algorithm is working and providing equal power panning amongst the nodes that are connected to it. You'll also notice that you can connect a triset to different types of nodes. So you can connect to a virtual node, a speaker node, and a silent node. And this allows you to do really fun and powerful things. So as we said, here's a basic 5.1 space map. And so if I have all my objects and I move them from left to right, they would appear out of that way. The other cool thing is space maps are, you can just draw them however you want. And for some reason, frontal sound systems are all the rage right now in the system. Despite what the lighting and video directors say, some people are still hanging 5 big hangs across the center of the stage. And so with that, you can still do the frontal panning and frontal mixing that everyone is really hot on right now. And if I move my sound to left to right, we have a panner that does the exact same thing. And so this is a great tool. The cool thing about frontal sound systems is they allow you to, you find yourself reducing the amount of EQ you're using, you're reducing the amount of compression you're using, because you're not frequency masking nearly as much as you would be in a traditional left-right system. And so one of the things that our competition has been saying is that it's really difficult to use Spacemap Go. And to prove them wrong, I thought what we'd do is just build a frontal space map in about 5 minutes so that you can get up and running and do frontal panning really, really fast. The way you can create space maps is under the create window here. And I'm in the trajectory view, but I can go to space maps and we can see our library of space maps that I've created. But to create a new space map, I simply click add. And what I've done is I've arranged my outputs in order already, and I've labeled my outputs within my galaxy here. So if we look, we can see that my frontal sound system is in my first 5 outputs, and I also have some subs and some front fills right here. And so that galaxy, those outputs are in order. And so what I can do is simply start building my space map. So the first thing we're going to use is speaker nodes. And so I'll just click and add 5 speaker nodes. And since my outputs are already arranged in order, they lay out nicely for me. And there we go. We have 5 speaker nodes. And one thing that I didn't put in was snap to grid. So to make things a little more even, I'm a little OCD. I'm going to put snap to grid on. I'm going to delete these loudspeakers and I'll add them again. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There are 5 loudspeakers for our frontal system. We also have 2 subwoofers in a gradient pattern. So we're doing cardioid subs. So I use derived nodes, and we're going to use those outputs as derived nodes. And then what we'll do is simply link the subwoofers to the 5 speakers that are across our stage. And I'll do the same for our negative side subwoofer. And so now anytime one of these speakers gets sound, it will send to the subs. And so I can base manage, I can actually control how much level each subwoofer gets, but for now, we'll just keep it at unity. Next step we need to do is start adding more points for our trisets. And the way to think about space maps when you're building them, I like to use a camping metaphor. It's like building a tent. So the nodes are the stakes and the poles that hold up the tent, and the triset is the canvas that drapes over the tent. Without the canvas, you don't have a tent, you just have a whole bunch of poles and stakes in the ground. Without the triset, you don't have audio. So we need to build some more anchor points for our trisets. And so that's what we'll do real quick, is I'll just add some virtual nodes. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then I'm gonna add a couple, only 3 up here. There we go. I think I did that. Yep, there we go. And so what this is going to do is allow us to have very granular movement as we're downstage towards the proscenium. And as we move up, what we're going to do is add some width to the sound. And so what I need to do first is link my virtual nodes. And so I'm just going to click link for these first 5 and make them have 100% of the level. So virtual nodes provide weighted power distribution to speaker nodes. So we see here that this virtual node is connected to 1 speaker node, and we can see that 100% of the link weight is sending to that 1 speaker. So watch what happens when we start connecting multiple speakers to a virtual node. Let's say if I move my object to the top left corner of this map, I want it to come out of these 3 loudspeakers. Well, I can link these 3 loudspeakers to that node. And now we notice that Spacemap did the math for you and provides 33% of the energy or audio level to each one of these loudspeakers. So that if I have 85 dB from my console coming into the Galaxy, I need that 85 dB to come out to the room at 85 dB. This does the audio math for you, and you can mess with it as well, and you can shape how much percentage. So let's say I'm doing a frontal system, and if I'm sitting right in front of this center speaker, I'm going to get blasted with the same level as this loudspeaker over here. So what I can do is reduce the level or how much energy comes out of this loudspeaker when my object, if I move my object over here. So I'll just reduce the center speaker to, let's say, 10%. And now we notice that Spacemap fixed the levels for us. And now if anytime I pan over here, these two speakers are going to be louder and this speaker is going to be quieter, so that the person sitting right in front of the center speaker will still image towards the left. And so you, as the sound designer, can create the panner that you need. For example, I can make it to where all 5 loudspeakers up center are added when I go up to the top. Or, and I can mirror what I did on the left side with the right. We'll reduce this one by 10%. And here we go. Okay, so if I go up to test this, we notice that nothing's moving in the matrix. Nothing's telling me anything. Well, the reason is because we laid out our tent poles and our stakes, but we did not put our canvas over our tent. We didn't add trisets. And so to add trisets, I just click the triset button and I can click add real quick and touch 3 points. And now we could see here, oh, did I lose it again? 1 second. Stand by for reflector. There we go. Cool. So now we have a triset right here. And we'll notice that if we move the panner out of the triset, the matrix isn't moving. But as soon as we get in, we start manipulating the triangle matrix level of the loudspeakers that are connected to these nodes. Well, I don't want to go around and click a whole bunch of triangles and this would just take forever. So what we did was we added a couple features. The first is to delete trisets. You can delete all, or you can use the iPad and you can swipe left and delete individual points on a space map. We also built an auto build feature in there. And so now if I just click build trisets, we have a frontal space map. Oops, I'm wrong mouse. 1 second. That mouse. There we go. And so now we have a frontal space map that can do all the fun, cool things. So we can see here that as we go down towards the lip of the stage, we're really focused out of 1 loudspeaker or 2 loudspeakers. And as we move up, we can see that we start adding level. And remember, we said weighted power distribution to these 3 speakers, and we reduced the center. Well, here we can see that that is translating there. And then as we go towards the center, we can see that we have weighted power distribution. So this is a super simple way to build a system. And what I could do is, let's say, for example, I loaded that up. I built that space map out. And now we could put that space map on all 32 of our channels, and we can mix our drums, our bass, our acoustic guitar, our band the way we need to. And there we go. Or we can use the overview window within Spacemap Go and make it touchable. And now we can manipulate. And if we need a reference, we can just add our frontal sound system that we made. Let's see. There we go. And now we can start positioning in the overview window, either stereo pairs or groups of channels as well. So there you go. If I wasn't talking, we could have built that in about 5 minutes. And again, that was 5 outputs plus 2 subs. That was 7 outputs that would run on a single Galaxy 816. And so, yeah, you don't need to be spending all of this ridiculous amounts of money for an immersive processor. It's built in, it's free. So let's talk about this object-based mixing world. Chances are you might have heard the word object-based mixing in this now immersive environment that people are talking about. And so what do we mean by that? Well, let's talk about what we've always done, which is this. And in theater, it's a little bit different, but let's just take stereo, for example. You have inputs, and those inputs have always fed into a console, and that console has been doing most of the legwork. You could pan, you could EQ, you could add dynamics. And really what you've been doing that whole time was trying to sculpt out space in the sonic spectrum so that that frequencies don't overlap and that each instrument has a place. Then you take all of those instruments and you send them down 1 or 2 pipes, whether it's stereo or mono, to 2 loudspeakers. In the case of Broadway, you might have an upper and a lower, but ultimately it's mono or stereo. Well, now with these immersive systems that are out, you have those inputs and those inputs are doing sent to the console still. And the console is still doing what it's great at, EQ, dynamics, and effects. But now they're saying, okay, instead of having all of your inputs sent down a stereo channel, send each input or as a bus or a group of inputs. For example, if you have a drum set that has 30 channels on it, chances are you don't want to have 30 channels to mess with and move around. So you can mix it down an aux to have maybe your kick snare and then your overheads mics in a separate channel. So that would be a 3-channel drum set as opposed to a 30. So then you have all these channels, or what are called objects now, that hit this large, very expensive black box called an immersive processor. And that immersive processor is then sent to a whole bunch of loudspeakers. And so now you have this weird relationship in immersive audio that's very different than what we're used to. In theater world, we're a little bit more used to it than the stereo rock and roll guys. But in general, here's what's happening. Your mix console is now your EQ, your dynamics and effects. And what we've done with these immersive processors is essentially take the pan pot off of the console, put it in a very large, expensive box, and charge you a whole bunch of money for it so you can buy a lot of loudspeakers. That's the whole point of an immersive processor. And it's great. It allows you to do some really interesting things. But most of these immersive systems require you to have a ton of loudspeakers, which in theater world, that's not practical most of the time. And they say you must have this many loudspeakers and use this certain type and do all of this. And that's okay, and it works, and there's very good reasons for that. But one of the things that's really awesome about Spacemap Go is, since it's running on a Galaxy, this black box is no longer just your pan pot. It's also your loudspeaker processor. So you can still tune your PA. And since it's just an output on a Galaxy, it can work with the stereo system. So if I want to pan stereo, I can use some silent nodes and build a panner that can actually control the fade and the level of a system. And if I have more loudspeakers, I can just add them as more outputs in the sound system. Now, Bob will be talking about this on week 4, but obviously the fundamental rules of physics still apply. It's still about picking the right speaker, putting it in the right place, and pointing in the right direction. And with immersive systems, the rules of engagement are a little bit different than your normal loudspeaker setup. But if you have 4 speakers on sticks and you're doing a one-off in a park, you could still use this tool. Just rent a Galaxy 408 and there you go. And of course, as we showed, we could do the fancy frontal thing that everyone's wild about. And so working with the loudspeakers you have is really important. Notice I didn't say you need 1,000 loudspeakers. I said you with the stereo setup. Here's the scenario. We're a touring production company, and every day is a different loudspeaker arrangement. So let's say for first, we walk into a system that's just a stereo line array and 2 subwoofers. So here is a space map. It's just a stereo panner. As I move left, we're only coming out of the left loudspeaker. And as I move right, we're only coming out of the right loudspeaker. Now, in this case, the outputs are later in the chain. So we can see left and right. So there we go. We have a stereo panner, and we can do fun things with it. But what if I was able to convince my director or production manager or producer that, and I got a little more budget, and I could do, I wanted to do some immersive sound. Well, I could add 2 more loudspeakers, and here's a space map that is a quad space map. And now, if I move around, we can see that we have a quad sound system, and there we go. And in real time, if let's say the next day, we can't hang for whatever reason, we can't hang the sound system that we want to in the rear. So what we take to get more granularity up front, we could take one of those rear surrounds and put it as a center speaker. And now we have a left, a center, and a right loudspeaker configuration with some subwoofers as well. And let's say we had front fills. So we see some more derived nodes here that have a left, center, right front fill. The other cool thing is with silent nodes is you can do level control. So let's say, for example, I want a sound to be a little quieter. Well, I can use the Y axis with the silent nodes that I built in as my level control. and I can use the x-axis like I would a traditional pan pot on a mix console. So there you go. That's what's really cool about space maps, is they can be super flexible. The next day, for example, I could have a 5.1 sound system. And so here we go. Instead of having silent nodes, now I have a 5.1, left, right, there we go. And then let's say we had a frontal sound system. We could do that as well. And in real time, you'll notice I'm just doing automation. We'll talk about that programming snapshots in a bit, but here's a frontal sound system. And now we can move across our stage. Let's imagine this line is our lip of a stage and our actor is moving around. And let's say we had 2 surrounds. Well, there we go. Now we can be out into the audience, and then we can also be panning this way. One other cool thing about space maps is we mentioned that they're abstractions of loudspeaker layouts. So what happens if we get into a space and for whatever reason, the lighting designer says, your 5 big hangs across the front of the sound system are too low. I need you to raise them up. Well, what you could do is build a space map like this that has 5 across the front up top connected to subwoofers. And then you could have some that have front fills. So for every main speaker, I have 1 front fill. So this space map's really cool because now I can vertically image something. So if I need to bring an image down because my sound system is a little too high, I can now push more out of the front fills to bring the imaging down a little bit more. So there we go. And of course, you might be working in a big theater or a theatrical space that has a lot of surrounds. So here would be something for a large room. This would be 5 across the front with some front fills, maybe some lateral surrounds, and maybe even some overhead loudspeakers. So if you had some overhead loudspeakers, you can move the helicopter around and then bring it out into the side walls as well. So there you go. That's how you can scale a space map system.
Chris was wondering, these movements are only changing levels in the matrix, but no delay changes.
It is level based in the panner right now, but remember that the Galaxy has a delay matrix. So each one of these delay matrices, you could fire snapshots. We'll talk about this next week, really, but you can fire snapshots that have delay matrix changes. Or you could do a delay change on your console as a snapshot change for fixed delay. So if you're doing a proscenium show, very typical musical theater setup, you would have 1 or 2 or 3 zones from downstage to upstage. You could do it that way. There's also some really fun ways to do it to where you could delay different outputs and do different things, but it's not doing dynamic delay movements. It's just doing level-based panning. But there's ways around that with it. And we know that people, especially theater, want a dynamic delay movement as well. So here's the thing. We have 32 channels. We have 32 pathways into the system. And again, when you think about what a immersive system is, what an object is, the way you have to separate your mind from is it's not an input on a console. It's whatever you want it to be. So your object can actually be multiple channels sent down a single bus. This is very good for summing things, but you now have 32 pathways to get into your system. Some of these other immersive processors have a lot more, but they all give you something like this. And this is what are called object panners. Some are in the shape of a circle, some are in the shape of a square, and some are 3D panners. And so they're really great. They look cool. I like the 3D one, but they're ultimately really hard to control. And now with the frontal panner, you're given something like this from the stage perspective that looks very similar to, from upstage, downstage, but it's from the stage perspective. All of these object panners share something in common, which is they have fixed loudspeaker locations. So if I have a 5.1 object panner and my loudspeakers are in a 5.1 setup, if I move all of my objects to the left side of the panner, the sound is always going to come out of the left side of the room. Because the algorithms that these panners and these systems are using require you to have a fixed loudspeaker locations. So regardless of the size of the room or the loudspeaker system you're working in, these panners are great because they instantly allow you to move an object and place it so that you know it's coming out of the loudspeaker that you want it to. And if I move all my objects to the right side of the room, regardless of the size of the room or regardless of the amount of loudspeakers I have, the sound of those objects would always come out of the right side of the room. These are what these algorithms are born to do. And they rely on very complex math and very specific speaker positioning to accomplish the effects that they're doing. So, but here's the rub. This is 32 objects. This is our overview screen. And this would be 32 objects in a single panner. And these immersive systems give you one panner for all of these objects. This is 32. This is ours. Imagine having 96. You start having, as a mixer, when you're in a live show environment, whether you're programming a show or mixing live, which Spacemap Go can do either, we really have to start playing a game of like, where is Waldo for guitar one? So like, okay, there's Waldo, there's guitar one. Okay, now I can move it around. That eats up a lot of time and it really makes things really difficult to do. So what we did when focusing on this and looking at what our competitors did was we said, let's change this up a little bit and make this even better. So we took all objects and in the GUI, we allow each object to have its own individual channel. So you still have the overview screen, but you also have individual channel views as well. So here's all 32 channels, and now we can easily figure out where Waldo is, and we can move that sound, figure out where Waldo is and move him wherever we need. Or if we have a horse sound effect, we can put that horse sound effect on a trajectory without interrupting the rest of our mix. And if I want to get an overview of our mix, we can simply just tap the overview window within Spacemap Go and see where our objects are. So that's cool. Everyone else does that, but they don't give you the 32 channel view. But here's where things get really, really fun. Every single one of these channels can have a completely different space map on it. And so if you think about this, there's 32 channels. Each channel can have its own custom panner doing its own thing. I don't think you would ever have 32 different space maps on a system, but you can. And in fact, each channel can have 2 space maps on it. So if I have a space map that is just the lateral loudspeakers, and I have a space map that's the overhead loudspeakers, I can crossfade a sound between the 2 space maps. Or I could just draw one space map that has the overhead speakers and the lateral speakers in it. So you can get really creative with this, but ultimately you now have 32 paths into the system, and every single one of those paths can address loudspeakers in any way you want. That's the difference between Spacemap Go and everything else, is you as the sound designer can send a sound to whatever you want, however you want, whenever you want. And it gives you as the sound designer the flexibility that you need for the challenges. Well, I mean, we're theater people, we do crazy things and we have to because sometimes scripts call for it. So that's the beauty of Spacemap. And so you're probably thinking that's cool, but what can I do with it? Well, let's just take a basic room full of speakers. We're going to have the 5 frontal, we're going to have some lateral surrounds, we're going to have some rear surrounds. So we could simply build a space map that looks like the space that we're in. And this is great because now my helicopter, as it's along the edges, can pan in and out the loudspeakers of the room. And again, this doesn't have to be a ton of loudspeakers. This could be 4 loudspeakers. You just draw the map with the loudspeakers that you have and put the speakers in the right place so that the audience is covered. Now, we can also do the frontal thing. We already showed what this is, so I'm going to skip over it real quick. But here's where things get interesting. Since space maps are abstractions, you can control the loudspeakers in the room in various ways using virtual notes or derived notes. So let's say I wanted to send a sound divided the room up into 4, and I wanted to send the sound in sort of a quadraphonic way, but I have more than 4 loudspeakers in the room. Well, I can use virtual nodes and draw these virtual nodes and link those virtual nodes to however many loudspeakers I want. We notice that the center virtual node also is sending to all of the lateral surrounds, but not the front system. So I can still, along the edges of my space map, move the helicopter around. But as I get towards the center, we can see that more loudspeakers get energized because I've linked these virtual nodes together. So this is where things get really fun and powerful. So if I have a quadraphonic reverb, for example, from my console, I can send those 4 channels of that reverb and put them in 4 corners of the room. One thing that I like to do is build what's called a half and half map. This is this map right here. Let's say I have a piece of stereo content that I've worked really hard in the studio to make, and I want to maintain that stereo relationship of the system. Well, what if I wanted to send that left side of the stereo content to the left side of the loudspeakers? Well, I could simply just make some virtual nodes and link all of those loudspeakers in the room together. And now I can do it both ways. So I can link my channels and have stereo content, not only still pan around and do what the helicopter is doing, but now we have a panner that allows us to send sound to all of the loudspeakers on the left side of the room, or the west side, the east side, and we can also go north side and south side. So I use this all of the time for stereo reverbs. One of the things that people say about Spacemap is, well, you guys don't have a reverb processor. No, we don't. It's a free update, but your console does. Chances are you as a sound designer have a favorite Waves plugin or a plugin that is your favorite reverb. I use this all the time with Altiverb. So I'll bounce out a mono reverb and send it, or stereo reverb, and send it to half of the room on each side. And it's very effective. And you can draw a map to get as granular or specific as you want. But then we run into a problem, which is, okay, I have that frontal sound system and I have my surrounds. I want to have the granularity and panning. So if I have an actor on stage, I want them to always be moving on a tracker or something, but I still want to be able to use my sound effects and bring things out. Well, space maps are abstractions, so they don't have to look like the loudspeaker configuration or the room. So now all you do is move your nodes down, add some virtual nodes, and now we have a panner that is a frontal panner on the top half of the map that does the same thing that everyone does. Then we have a surround panner on the rear. And since it's just a way for us to draw it, we just draw on more virtual nodes. And now we can control the sound system in very unique ways. So if I want to send a sound to all surrounds, I just put a virtual node in the middle and link it to all the surround channels. So here we go. On stage, our actor could be walking across the stage and localizing towards each loudspeaker. And as they get further up stage, the sound comes out of more loudspeakers. And then here we can move that sound or person out into the space and still do our quadraphonic panning that we made earlier. And so what we did was combine 4 space maps and drew one space map that has ultimate control of the loudspeaker system. So there you go. And of course, we're in live sound, and there are whole bunches of subsystems and fills that we have to use. And so this is where the derive node really comes in. Here's a scenario that happens a lot in theater. For whatever reason, the mix console can't be in the room and has to be in a booth. Well, you could build this is a single galaxy system. So what we have here is a main system out in the theater that's 5 across the front, 2 surrounds, and a couple rear surrounds. And then in the booth where your mix console is, what you could do is set up a simple 5.1 setup and link the derive nodes to what's happening out in the house, so that you can maintain the panning and the things that need to happen in real time. So as I move a sound around, we can see that what's happening in the room is translating to what's happening in the booth, so that your mix engineer or your A1 can mix and still understand what's actually happening in the space. So this is a very powerful tool using derive nodes. Another use for derive nodes, we have to deal with this all the time in theaters, is under balcony and over balcony systems. So in a typical theater with a balcony, you'll have a main sound system. Then you'll have an upper balcony, which typically will have maybe some delays across the front. maybe a couple laterals or rear surrounds. Above the balcony, you have less speakers than underneath the balcony. So let's say, for example, you have 3 delays, left, center, and right, and then you have just 2 rear surrounds. So in the upper balcony, they're getting a 5.1-ish mix of what's happening in the room. And then let's say underneath the balcony, you have left, center, right fills, and then you have more lateral fills on the sides, and then maybe some rear surrounds as well. So out here is our orchestra, and using derived nodes, we're controlling the upper balcony and the lower balcony. And so now, as the sound moves around in the orchestra level, we can see that it's translating to the upper balcony and lower balcony. And all you do is just draw this map and link the outputs to where you want them. And we can see that's being translated, whether it's on a trajectory or it's on a single pan. So in real time or recalled via QLab or something. So Spacemap Go is really designed to be a live mixing tool in addition to a theatrical, sound design tool. And so we want this to be as fast and quick as possible. With that in mind, you can get really creative. This might not be in theater world, but let's say you're on stage and you have a stage with 3 monitor positions and you have different bands members that are on wireless walking around to each wedge location. Well, you could simply just build a space map that's controlling the wedges of the on stage. And if that person was on a tracking system, anytime they walk close to a monitor wedge, it would punch in their monitor mix automatically for them, so that you don't really have to deal with popping in and out monitor mixes. This happens a lot on big concert tours, stage environments. I could see this being used maybe for dancers. Let's say you have a prima ballerina or something, and it's a solo show. You can punch in their mix, and they're not on yours. So there you go. That's another use of a space map. Let's talk about the mother of all sound systems. That's really difficult, but yet producers and directors like to use it because it sells a lot of seats. That's in the round. So this is Sydney Theatre Company. What they had was a whole bunch of loudspeakers with a certain given inventory, and their space is configured differently for each show. So they might be in the round, they might be doing a thrust, they might be doing an on-end, all sorts of different loudspeaker configurations, but they have a given inventory of loudspeakers. And what we see here is a whole bunch of surrounds, and then we have a left, center, right on 2 sides of the room, and a left, right on the other 2 sides of the room. And we have some front fills. Well, we can make a space map that looks like this room, but the problem with this space map is if I move my sound around, let's say I put a sound here, the audience over here would hear it, but not the audience over here. So this is great for sound effects and things, but what if you have to mix a musical in the round? Well, what I like to do is divide the room up into sections of seating and sort of look at what needs to be controlled. And if I'm mixing from where my tech table is or where front of house is, I want it to be from the front of house perspective. And I want the rest of my mix to translate to the rest of the room. So I can build a space map that doesn't look like the space, but that controls the system the way I need it to. So for example, if my console is here at front of house, I have a left, center, right in front of me. I have a left, a center, and a right. Then I have 4 rear surrounds. Left, we see those 4 rear right there. And then what I can use using derived nodes is replicate the other side of the room and just derive the signal off, so that anytime left comes out left here, it comes out of left over on that side of the room. So that I still maintain my panning and my busing and all of that the way I would. And this is where things get really fun. Is, okay, well, you now have a section of seating that only has 4 loudspeakers to it. What do I do about my center speaker? Well, using derived nodes, I can link my left speaker here to the main left, the center here, and put this link down 6 dB. And then I can link the right speaker to the center as well and put it down 6 dB. and create a phantom center for this left-right system or subsystem. And I can do the same thing for the surrounds as well and link the surrounds to multiple rear surrounds. And then we could do the same for the other side. And now we have a space map that's controlling the entire system. And we're still doing the fun thing. So if I'm on stage and I need to pan my musician as they're walking around, I can use the top half of the map. And if I want to translate them to the rear or move a sound effect around, I can do that here as well. And so there you go. That's an example of a system to where that's given, that's, has a limitations, which is what we come up with all the time, and challenges. And what we did was worked with a given inventory, and we said, put your speakers here. This is probably the best place for them. And here are some example space maps. So really the sky is the limit. You as the sound designer can draw and control the system however you want. And here's where things can get really crazy. Recently, for a football company, NCAA football team, they came to us during the pandemic and they said, our players are used to having 100,000 people in the stands. We would like to replicate that. And is there any way you guys can help us replicate the audience crowd noise? Now, the problem was the NCAA has very strict rules on what sounds can be played to replicate the audience noise. And what they do is they give you a single mono file of crowd noise. So you have to take a single mono file and send it to a series of loudspeakers and make it sound like 100,000 people. Well, that's really difficult to do. So what we did was we made a system of 16 loudspeakers across the bowl of the stadium, and we crossfired them into the other side of the stadium. And so we actually used the acoustics of the stadium, the empty stadium, to energize the room. And so we played the audience sound through it, but the problem was it's a mono signal. So when you think about what a crowd noise is, it's white noise. It's various levels at different frequencies constantly changing. So what we did was come up with a space map that would add random level changes to the 16 loudspeaker locations. So here it is, using a virtual node, and it looks crazy, but you can turn off how you view things in Spacemap Go. And so here we have a randomizer, and we can see that as the trajectory is moving across, we can see various level changes of the audience level. So this allowed us to replicate an audience very quickly and not having to buy a really, really expensive processor. This ran on one Galaxy. There was leopards around the area, and yeah, leopards and subs. And they also used it for replicating a fake marching band across the stage. And they did all sorts of fun things eventually. But there you go. That's the randomizer. So space maps don't have to look like the spaces you're in. Okay, that's it for my main presentation. But here is our Steve Jobs moment. We're announcing, and we have announced, the Spacemap Go console and DAW plugin. So this is a plugin that will be also free, much like Spacemap Go, that you can just download and use for your mix consoles or your DAWs, whatever your favorite DAW of choice is. The first type of consoles that will be coming out with this are the Avid S6L and probably the SSL consoles. We are interested in working with other console manufacturers. So if you have a console and you want Spacemap Go to work natively on it, talk to those console manufacturers and send them to us. We're actively seeking that and working with other console manufacturers as well. And it will also run in a DAW. And so it works bidirectionally, and it uses control messages that are directly communicating to the Galaxy. It's not using OSC. And what you'll see is it works bidirectionally. So I can be on my iPad on the right and move sound around. And I can also be on the plugin for each channel and move Spacemap Go around. And since it's a plugin, of course, you can do automation lanes. So what's cool about this for a theatrical world is when you're mixing your show and in tech, you can actually record all your automation and get it in place and be ready to go. Or let's say you have a director, you can hand the director the iPad and you can say, where do you want that bird to fly? And give them the iPad and you can record it in. That way, if they give you a note on the next tech that the bird didn't move where it was, you can say, no, this is actually you recording it. That is your movement. So there you go. It's a really cool plugin and really, it'll be awesome. And you can also do snapshot changes from it. So you'll be able to do snapshot automation lane changes in real time via the plugin. So if you have a Soundscape or a Pro Tools session or Ableton session, you can recall snapshots and change things as well. And one last thing, we are announcing the road show for Spacemap Go. So obviously we've been locked up in our rooms. Hopefully, vaccines are coming along and people are able to go out more. So here's some dates that are tentative. Check out the Meyersound website and also talk to your sales manager. This will be the US only. But check out some dates, and if you can come see us and experience Spacemap Go, we'd love to schedule it. You can reach out to sales@meyersound.com for the latest info. But these are the cities we'll be visiting with Spacemap Go, so you can get your hands on it. Again, if you have an iPad, you could just download Compass and download Spacemap Go and work offline and start getting a feel for the application. And yeah, so there we go. That's it. Do we have
one thing I can add, Josh and everyone, is that next week I'm going to actually be in New York, and on Wednesday I have the opportunity. We have a system set up at the Noble Room at Jazz at Lincoln Center. This is a system we set up back in October, and it's remained in that space. And I'm happy to host any demos if you want to see or hear and experience Spacemap Go. And you're in Manhattan next week. I could be there on Tuesday as well, though my schedule is kind of in flux on that day, but definitely on Wednesday the 9th. I've already got one scheduled and looking to book a couple others on Wednesday next week at Jazz and Lincoln Center in New York.
Yep, and also we have a location in Burbank at Center Staging in Burbank. If you reach out to sales@meyersound.com and you want to get a demo or just spend some time in the room, feel free to. And if you're in the Nashville area, we have a room as well set up there. So you can go in. Oh, Lauren is asking, will the plugin work with Reaper? Absolutely, it works with Reaper. We tested it. It works great. I saw the console on an SXL. I saw the console plugin work the other day on Avid SXL. And yeah, it's really cool. And it's fun. The plugin in especially for themed entertainment and for theatrical is going to be really good. How about Waves? We have been talking to Waves, but we don't have anything official. Iran from Waves here in the United States hung out with us at the AES Nashville event a few weeks ago. He's Dweezil Zappa's front of house engineer, and apart from working with Waves, and he was like, I want to put this on Dweezil Zappa for sure. So hopefully, and if you want it, tell them to tell them. We're willing to work with any of these console manufacturers. Yeah, so for session 3, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about like just basic theatrical workflow from starting, tuning your sound system, getting up and running, saving snapshots, and then programming, things like QLab and external recall. That will be session 3. Next week, we're doing Map 3D. So introduction to Map 3D, and then a couple of tips and tricks just to help you get in. Merlin will be teaching that. And then week 4, we're going to combine it all together. And week 4, we'll have Bob teaching immersive sound design in Map.
Well, then, on behalf of Meyersound, thank you for attending today's session. Special thanks to our host. And I get to say motion to adjourn. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone. See you next week.